Oh, we had a dip into our time bank. We're just past six
No,
o'clock.
I know, but we were early last week, so
We
this is
were.
kind of
We've been
kind
earlier
of
a few times.
kind of
So,
making up for it.
hey, it's Friday night. Time for the evidence-based podcast, triathlete podcast, also known as Two Guys Talking Triathlon. But tonight we got three guys talking triathlon.
Three guys talking triathlon, even better.
Yes, this is going to be fun. So tonight we've got a colleague and a fellow endurance athlete, Dr. Graham McGinnis. Hey, Graham, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you guys?
Awesome. It's
Doing
Friday,
good.
so we're leading into the weekend.
Always exciting. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you. We've been trying to twist your arm to get on this, and we finally, sort of broke you down. So this is great. And, I think it's going to be neat for people to get to know you for your endurance expertise, but then also some of the research that you do, which is just super interesting. And I've already learned something in sitting in on your presentation. I've learned this term social jet lag, which I never knew before, but I really love it. And I'm sure we're going to get to that tonight.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining. But maybe a good place to start is give it a little bit of your background. I know you've done R3, which our endurance community will know that's a Grand Canyon rim to rim to rim, which is a phenomenal endurance event. How long did that take you?
I actually was just trying to look that up on my Strava, and I don't remember
Yeah,
exactly, but it was a pretty long day out there.
yeah.
We started in the dark and we finished in the dark, so I think that's the benchmark for a leisurely R3 versus a really aggressive R3.
Yeah, that is really fantastic. I mean, that's no joke, and it is yeah, it is a double digit hours of some amount. So definitely. Well, maybe let's start with your academic background. Where are you originally from, and where did you do your training?
Yeah, I'm from North Carolina. I grew up in Chapel Hill area, right outside of Chapel Hill. And I ended up going to undergrad at Appalachian State University, which almost no one knew about until we beat Michigan in arguably the greatest upset in college football history.
Yeah,
We went on to do that a few more times in recent years too.
yeah,
Um, and that's really where I started getting into exercise science. I was kind of in the pre-med camp, pre-PT camp,
yeah.
and I started shadowing and having more experiences in those environments, and also started working in a research lab, and figured out that that was really where my interests were, and where my passion was to actually just be doing research,
Mm.
and not working clinically. So after a whole lot of time volunteering in a lab, I pursued my master's in doctoral training with the same guy I was volunteering with at Appalachian, but
Mm.
at that time we moved down to Alabama at Auburn University.
Yeah. Wow, so East Coast and Southeast type of
Yeah,
person. So yeah. And so then you eventually came out here to UNLV. So you came from Auburn to UNLV?
right after Auburn, I spent a couple years in Birmingham,
Mm.
Alabama, at University of Alabama at Birmingham,
Mhm.
doing some postdoctoral work, and that's where the interest in circadian rhythms really took off there.
Ah,
Another brief stop on the academic train before I came out here.
yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, you've been a great addition to the department, and it's been great to have you. And so this is sort of fun. So, how about your endurance background? I know I mentioned R3. What other endurance events? I know you do a lot of hiking. So,
Yeah. Well, I started off, swimming since I was 4, and that was really where sports started for me. I was pretty lousy at everything else. I played soccer and lacrosse and football and all those things, but I was terrible at them. Um, and that was around the time where people said, if you can't go fast, go far.
yeah.
So I kind of stuck that in my mind and started trying to, transition to even the longer swimming events when I was swimming through high school and club and college and stuff like that. And I got tied in with the cycling club at Appalachian State,
Hmm.
and that was where the multi-sport started off for me. Was cycling. I was already a good swimmer, and I'm still a pretty mediocre runner. So um, I started getting into triathlon, but I would just start out strong, do okay on the bike, and then just get crushed in the run. And that's still kind of the story to this day. But I started racing tries in college. As with all other hobbies, they kind of fell off during grad school.
Yeah.
And I've started trying to get back into it a little bit more now. And also more of the ultra endurance running kind of events like 50s and things like that.
That's great.
I think it's amazing that you were in a cycling team in college, because this is not a thing in the West Coast, right? But in
Yeah,
the Southeast and in the Northeast, it's a thing, like club sport of actual, I guess, is it called an NCAA club sport, right? Is that how it's done?
I think so. There's varying levels of regulation or even, you know, how serious the clubs are taking themselves. But ours was really good. We had, in our division, we had some national champion riders usually every year.
It's interesting though, like we don't have this in the West Coast.
Mm-mm.
Like, and honestly, until I met you, I didn't even know it was a thing.
Mm.
And so John, how about you up in the Buffalo area and in New York? And is it a thing up there?
A little bit, but I like you're talking about. I'm more familiar with the Southeast type of teams that do club cycling. So
I mean, it's something that obviously, you know, as far as like a grassroots thing, I mean, I think it's great. I mean, I wish we had something like that in the West Coast, you know, because we look at our cycling community and in Southern Nevada, and it's, I hate to say it, it's mostly old people, right? And very few teenagers or young adults are actually like road biking. So I don't know. I'm kind of jealous.
Yeah, and I wasn't really familiar with how competitive the collegiate triathlon scene was until I came out here as
Yeah.
well and started even in college. We did a couple of you know, national collegiate races. I think I did one in Texas, but even the ones that show up here to the race in Lake Mead, coming out of Colorado, groups from Arizona and Colorado are just incredibly fast.
yeah.
They're getting faster and faster. So,
Well, and I think that, you know, that now that it's an NCAA sport, like a true NCAA sport, at least on the women's side, that's pushing things, right?
Yeah.
And it's such a good thing because it actually is providing opportunity. And we're actually seeing more kids, even in Southern Nevada, getting into triathlon, but there's no impetus for cycling. And that, you know, there's an impetus for running and swimming, but nothing really for cycling. And kind of, I don't know, if we don't have kids cycling, like it's not good for triathlon and for the sport of triathlon.
yeah, and I'm sure this is a rabbit hole going in a different direction, but I think there's a little bit of an access issue with the kind of the financial burden of starting off in triathlon and cycling, especially. So you gotta, the equipment investment is pretty harsh.
No, it is. But when we look at like, and I can tell you this because I worked in high level soccer, it's just as expensive, right? These parents are paying an exorbitant amount of money to travel to California every weekend, and coaching fees and private coaching fees. And, you know, it could be $20,000-$30,000 a year, easy, that people are investing in, like soccer. And you think, oh, soccer, it's an easy access sport. All you need some cleats and, you know, to be at a higher enough level to like get a college scholarship, it's potentially tens of thousands of dollars a year.
Yeah, that chasing the scholarship issue with age group sports. So, all right. So I got a question on the cycling or your swimming or your running. Do you train the same time every day?
No. I do most of my running at the same time every day because I'm kind of a peer pressure athlete. So I thrive in group training.
Yeah.
And I know that's probably not your mentality, John.
We all do it differently, but I do solo because I can't hear when I'm training anyhow. So it's not a lot of fun for the other person to keep repeating.
Yeah, so I've been going to the Lifetime group runs for years now, and those are my most reliable running buddies there. So it's a 6 p.m. run group,
Yeah.
It works good for getting off of work at that time,
Yeah.
accountability, all those other great things to keep you going back.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think as we start jumping into the exercise timing conversation,
Yeah.
it's definitely not the time I would be doing any races. So,
Yeah.
it becomes an issue of, are you training your body to peak at a different time?
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
are we performing at the best times for our body and things like that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
raises interesting questions.
So can we start off actually, maybe can you help us and just kind of define like what a circadian rhythm is and potentially how that would impact our training?
Yeah. So I guess the most fundamental definition of a circadian rhythm is any biological process that repeats in a roughly 24-hour cycle.
Mm.
So within our body, one of the most repeatable circadian rhythms is like our core body temperature. And there's old studies from many years ago where people were testing kind of the endogenous nature of this circadian rhythm, meaning what our body's doing autonomously without input from the environment versus taking the input from things like the sunlight, or nowadays more like our lights and screens. And they would take people into caves and spend a month there,
Mm.
and without any changes in temperature, because within a cave you kind of stay stable, without any external light cues. They still had almost exactly 24-hour patterns in a lot of their physiological processes like body temperature and things like that. So with humans, it's just a little bit longer than 24 hours. So 24 point uh, a little bit of change. So without any external cues, we get a little bit longer each day.
Mm.
And the other model organism that I do a lot of research in is mice, and they're actually just a little bit less than 24 hours, so 23 hours and a little bit. So without external cues, their days get a little bit shorter each time.
Mm.
But in general, anything that is happening in our body or that we're doing that repeats in a 24-hour cycle kind of falls into the broad umbrella of circadian rhythms.
Mm.
So a lot of I don't know how far we want to jump into depth for the beginning, but as the field has progressed, more and more focus is put on actually not so much the entire organism or even our behavior, our sleep wake cycle and things like that, but all the way down to the molecular level, where all of our cells and tissues actually have their own independent circadian clocks.
Mm.
So they're all kind of ticking away at a 24-hour time scale on their own in a really interesting cell autonomous manner.
I love this. And so I think it's important for everyone to know this is your area of research and you're an expert in this area. And it's so super interesting. So I am not well read in this area. So I've got some questions that may be super simple, but I mean, is this circadian rhythm pretty consistent across all sorts of populations or regions in the world?
Yeah. So within the confines of our 24-hour cycles of light and dark, we're pretty consistent.
Mm.
Um, and it can be shifted by changes in the light dark cycle, daylight savings times, at northern latitudes that are exposed to differing cycles of light and dark in different seasons. So that it's flexible, but roughly speaking, we're all kind of really close to this 24-hour time scale. Um, this is actually a really fun question that a student asked at a conference to one of the most prominent chronobiologists, talking about the fundamentals of circadian rhythms. Was, if we found intelligent life on another planet, do you think they'd have a 24-hour circadian rhythm?
Ah.
And the guy was like, probably not, unless that planet had a 24-hour cycle of light and dark.
Ah.
So it is a good answer and a thoughtful answer to this idea that we've really just developed these systems in response to the cycles of light and dark. And these aren't, humans aren't the only things that do this. Pretty much everything responds in this 24-hour cycle, even plants.
Mm.
Interesting. So that being said, and I know we're going to get into some weeds on this. when the time shifts, so like we're in the winter, like I have, this is just me personally, I have a really hard time getting up early and training.
Mhm.
In the summer, I'm way better. Like I can get up at 6 and go for a run, no problem. Now, some of it is like I just think it's because it's cold and I don't enjoy, running when it's really cold. But is it maybe more than just the cold? Is it potentially a circadian rhythm thing? Like, does it shift
And
with the time of year as well?
and note that this question is coming from a Canadian. He's
Yeah,
doesn't like the cold. So, all right, I
I'm
just need
here.
to throw that in.
That's why
So.
I'm here. And in Canada, it didn't get light till 9 a.m. So I wasn't doing anything in the morning.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of folks, and I think light being one of the strongest cues for the circadian rhythm. When it's dark outside, if we think back to our cave people ancestors, they weren't getting up and doing a whole lot.
Mhm.
They weren't going to get moving until the lights came on, and that light was the sun. So it's pretty hard, I think, evolutionarily for us to fight those underpinnings and just say, I'm going to get up and do this in the dark. Some people are better at it, and those are morning larks. Those are
Mhm.
early chronotypes, and they're special people. And I think they maybe self-select to some of these elite sports like triathlon that require a lot of early morning sessions.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that's totally natural, and it's so much easier to convince your body that it's time to work when,
Mhm.
evolutionarily speaking, your body is, primed to work at that time. But in any case, it's probably not going to do its best work in the early morning.
Right.
That is, generally speaking, going to happen later in the afternoon.
Yeah, I do my absolute best around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Like
Mhm.
I feel like you and I have ran a lot of times at that time, Graham, and that's when I feel the best. Like I feel loose, I feel good, I'm alert.
Hmm.
I'm a different person compared to like 6 in the morning. Like 6 in the morning, I have to force it.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm absolutely the same. I'm not a morning person at all, and I think swimming is probably my least favorite morning exercise activity. It is the mental block of getting into a cold pool when you're already cold. Your body temperature is naturally lower at that time of day.
Ah.
The whole process just is unappealing to me, even though that's early morning swim practice is kind of like a hallmark of growing up swimming. It's just still unpleasant to me.
How do we tell if in general if we're a morning lark or a night? I think night owls kind of know, but how about the morning lark? How do you know?
Well, there are some interesting questionnaires that are available. There's one called the Munich Chronotype Questionnaire, the MCTQ. There's also the Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire, the MEQ.
So these
And
are just like surveys you take? Like, is it pen and
yeah,
paper, or can we do it online? Is it?
yeah, there's actually some digital ones that I think you end up kind of just becoming part of these really large populations of people that complete these questionnaires to kind of poll the population. Uh,
I think John's looking for it right now.
I
yeah,
am. Yes.
So it's called can you repeat it? The Munich.
yeah, you can type in MCTQ, the Munich Chronotype Questionnaire,
Okay.
or the MEQ, the Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire. So most of these questionnaires are designed to kind of ask questions about when you prefer to do different types of activities.
Right.
But
Mhm.
inherently, you kind of have an idea probably at this point, if you're a morning lark or a night owl. Someone's already told you at some point in your life, I don't want to meet you at that time to run because it's too early, or I can't believe you stay up that late. Right? So you've probably learned a little bit about yourself by this time. So if you take
Mhm.
those questionnaires, you're not likely to be super surprised.
Right.
But in general, the population's following a nice, bell curve normal distribution, and there's a lot of intermediate type people that are just
Mm.
flexible.
Mhm.
We work all right at all times, but there's a pretty small
I think I'm in the
percentage.
middle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm an intermediate person. I would have at some point thought I was more of a night owl, but not so based on those questionnaires.
Mm.
And they validate these questionnaires actually against the circadian rhythm and core body temperature. That you can actually see that there's physiological manifestations to these, mental constructs that we think about, like a morning type or a night owl.
Yeah.
So a morning type person has an earlier peak in their body temperature than a night owl.
So my ring that takes my body temperature all the time, I could potentially get this information from if I really downloaded it and paid attention.
Yeah. Actually, I remember I was talking about this with somebody else. John, you sent me, I think, some core body temp data from you from one of the wetsuit studies.
Yep.
Where you were doing some short swims, and I plotted it out over the course of a couple of a day or so, and you could see a nice prominent circadian rhythm from that too.
Oh, that's awesome. So does this rhythm or this night owl morning, what am I saying it wrong?
Morning lark, night owl,
Yeah.
morning type, evening type, whatever
Morning
you want to
versus
call it.
even. Does that change over your lifespan, or is it once you're this, this is what you are?
So there's a little bit of plasticity in that, and I think people naturally become more of a morning person as they age. And I somehow, my dad, I think, is moving in the other direction. He's become more of a night owl as he ages. Yeah, over the lifespan, the whole circadian biology thing is really interesting because people have started associating the strength of a person's circadian rhythm over their lifespan, especially as they start to age, with the onset of different clinical conditions. One that's gotten a lot of attention in the media is how the circadian rhythm is associated with cognitive decline in Alzheimer's disease. Whether changes in people's sleep behavior and their circadian rhythm actually precedes some of the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. So later in life, when and there's a whole different field of clinical circadian rhythm research focusing on a variety of different conditions. But it does change a little bit. I think in our formidable years, you're kind of a reliable chronotype. And my grad student would argue that you are definitively going to be one chronotype and you can't change that. And there was actually a cool study where they forced people to function outside of their chronotype for a pretty extended period of time. And of course you can do it. If anyone who's taken an early shift or a later shift knows you can do it. But as soon as you're released back into the wild, you naturally go back to your normal rhythms.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and here in Las Vegas, I mean, we are a true 7 day a week, 24-hour city, which means people need to be working at that night shift. And I don't know how they do it, but I'm more of a morning person, so I don't understand that. So that's something that I guess you mentioned this before. So maybe people self-select for that type of work, or I guess you've got to be that chronotype to be able to work that type of shift.
I think people probably end up maybe self-selecting in terms of longevity in those shifts. If it really isn't working out for somebody, they probably leave that shift or leave that type of employment. But there's actually, I was just meeting with someone else at UNLV that's kind of looking to look for a little bit of like molecular markers of how well people tolerate shift work. And if there's a type of person that can actually handle that better.
Interesting.
Instead of people just being forced into a bad shift, if we could say, hey, you know what? Based on your biology, your chronotype, your et cetera, you would be best at tolerating this kind of work.
Oh,
So
interesting. And we actually have a lot of triathletes that work at night and then they just come to the race in the morning after their shift. So
that's incredible.
I don't know how they do that. That's amazing.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys at my running group too that after we run at 6 p.m. they hit the showers and go to work. And I'm like, no.
So you can function. It's just not perfect. It's not as prime or as good as it probably could be. Is that what we're getting at?
Yeah. And I think a good question that still isn't totally clear is, if you're a shift worker, when's the better time for you to exercise?
Yeah.
Because that's one of the strong cues that we can give our body. There's really a couple of main ways we can tell our body what time it is, aside from the sun. That's the strongest one is light, the photic input that kind of hits us straight in the eyes, straight to the brain. It tells our body what time it is. But the other ways we can do that is through food. That gives a lot of our peripheral tissues like muscle, liver, it gives them more of a time cue. And then also physical activity. So you can kind of use those cues to try to shift your biology a little bit to one time zone or another even. So if you're a shift worker, is it better to use those cues and exercise in the morning, or I guess before you go off to work, before you work your shift, or is it better to do that at the end of your shift? The few I've talked to about this pretty much say, I don't want to work out at the end of my shift. Yeah. So it's amazing you kind of talk about folks coming after work and coming to a race. Yeah. It's really impressive. I admire that.
So let me ask you a question. It's not a question, but let me give you my story. So last night I swam 7 p.m., right? Bright blue light at the pool. And then get home 8:30, make dinner 9 o'clock, eat dinner, go to bed at 10. And I can't fall asleep, right? Because I gave myself the cues that it was earlier, right? Because I this bright blue light in the pool, eating later than I probably should. So what does that do as far as the impact to the next day for me? Because I'm going to add something to you, because John said, man, you look kind of tired. That's me today. I'm like, yeah, I am a little tired, like a little more tired.
Yeah.
Is there an impact the next day?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely can be. And I think one of the things that's become just really forefront in sports media is how important sleep is to recovery. You've got NFL athletes endorsing mattress companies, the things, like the Aura Ring that are just rampant amongst athletes, the Whoop straps, all of these things. So I think that the appreciation that poor sleep quality is going to be really harsh on recovery and allowing your body to adapt and recover to the stresses you put on it. That's probably going to contribute to your next day's performance, or your next day's even, just general feel and function. But, so at the time that it starts to get dark outside, our body is naturally starting to prepare to go to sleep. Our dim light melatonin onset, is kind of this idea that when the lights go out, melatonin goes up, it starts priming us for sleep. But if you're constantly exposed to light, if you're on your computer, if you're reading on your phone at night, if you're heads in the pool with a bright blue light, all that's just shifting those cues to go to sleep later and later. And it, not ideal. So I'm not super surprised that he didn't feel top notch today.
So I mean, I do this every Tuesday and every Thursday, so it's just the way it is. But some things that I'm like trying to do to mitigate this is like keep my goggles on and wear dark goggles. And then I also try and don't tell my swim coach this, but I don't go super hard on those nights. Trying, especially the second half of the practice, I try and keep it a little bit more mellow, more like zone 1, zone 2. And because I find that especially if my coach isn't so much like this anymore. We used to have a coach that used to want to do sprinting at the end of practice. If I did those like 8:25s all out at the end of practice, oh man, then I for sure couldn't fall asleep. Because you're wired, right? Like, and it was set up like a race. And I'm like, well, man, we're racing at 8:30 at night. And then I want to go to bed I want to be in bed by 10. I was still like, it was only 8 hard 25s, but that was enough to, kind of push me over the edge. So other than those two things, is there any other advice you would give somebody, like dark goggles and taking it a little easier?
Yeah, I think you also unless you stopped you used to say that you would wear the blue blockers at night too.
Yeah, I do. And so when we get home, then I put the blue blocking glasses on. Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah. And is that still a thing? I haven't read anything recently about it, but
Yeah, I think, as newer, flashy technologies arise, older things just, get less attention. But um, as far as I know, the effect of blue light hitting the eye is still a pretty strong photic entrainment stimulus. So probably blocking that's still a good idea late at night.
so until I started wearing the I wear the smart goggles, the form goggles that give you all the data and stuff. I used to exclusively swim at night in orange goggles.
Hmm.
And I did notice a difference when I switched to orange goggles. Now the form goggles are pretty dark, which is okay, but I think the orange goggles were better. And maybe it's more psychological because I know that blocks more of the blue light. And then obviously if I'm going to read on my iPad or something, I wear them and then I put the blue blocking
Put on
on
night mode.
and make sure that I have the brightness turned way down. And then when we get home, make sure the least light possible in the house.
Yeah, I started after doing this research in my postdoc and stuff. If I have to get up in the middle of the night, I absolutely won't turn lights on, and I'll just walk into walls. I'll step on my dogs, but I don't want to turn on the light, and I don't want to give myself this big bright stimulus in the middle of the night and mess up my sleep. So another thing I was thinking about, a couple of years ago, I was talking to a company that was they were adding melatonin to their protein supplements as almost like a, post-workout PM type of formula. And I lost track of them. I didn't end up working with them or anything. But that could be another kind of thing where you're double dipping on some sort of recovery product and a sleep aid.
Yeah, because I looked at one of your papers, one of your reviews on circadian rhythm, and you even talk about how you should be eating different foods at different times of day.
Yeah, your body it's amazing some of the studies that have been done on animals and humans to look at how your body's prepared for different macronutrients at different times. And it this is something I just find super interesting from the different levels of research that you can do this kind of thing in. And you think of well, sometimes I just want a saltier snack or a sweeter snack, or I'm in the mood for higher protein content versus something more carb heavy. But they've done studies where they actually would isolate sections of the GI and see how permeable it is to the absorption and digestion of different macronutrients. So, I mean, it spans the spectrum from personal preference to from I like sweets at this time, I like salts at that time, all the way down to the molecular level where your tissues are better at taking different nutrients at different times.
Wow.
Now you're blowing my mind because now I'm like, should I be taking my multivitamin at night? Should I take it in the morning?
I think that is such a good question, and I really want to find an opportunity to work on that kind of project moving forward. I've been kind of intermittently pestering Dr. Basu about this.
Yeah.
And I had even written a grant to study something of this nature, where you would work on the timing of a supplement to see if it's better or more effective at certain times versus others. Because a lot of the literature for antioxidant supplements, anti-inflammatory supplements suggest that if you take it before you exercise, then you blunt some of your adaptations to that stress.
Right.
So if you extrapolate that and say, if I take it at the beginning of the day, maybe my whole day's stress load is lower, but is that necessarily a good thing? Maybe it would be better if I took it before I went to bed, so that when I'm in my rest and recovery phase, that's when all of those things are starting to come on board. But there, in other populations or in other clinical conditions like blood pressure, that's been one area where nighttime blood pressure medication has been shown to kind of induce this dipping hypertension phenotype. It's actually supposed to be better than, in some cases, better than taking hypertension medication during the day. And not a doctor, so please don't modify any pharmacological use based on this podcast. But there's papers out there that suggest that the timing of different types of pharmaceuticals can really change how effective they are, how bad the side effects are, and some of the outcomes.
I love this, and this is so important and so natural for the body to operate this way. And like Ted's talking about exercising at night and not being able to sleep, I fortunately had learned that a while ago, and I'm like, I don't exercise at night anymore, but I do play foosball, and then I have a hard time sleeping after a foosball. Yeah, it sounds silly, but it's that activity. So then we sort of throw our day off that way, or really throw the next day off, and this is where it leads into this term that you told me about it, and you look at is this social jet lag. Could you talk a little bit about what that means and why that's important to look at?
Yeah, yeah. So I think probably we're all pretty familiar with the idea of actual jet lag. We've traveled to all kinds of places. You guys travel all over the world to race, and you get there, and for a few days you don't feel great. GI is messed up, sleep's all wrong. Appetite is all over the place.
Oh.
And that's because you've changed your environment. You've gone to a different time zone, a different light cycle. And what people have found out is that without leaving your time zone, people do that on a kind of every week basis.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of students, a lot of adolescents, they have about 5 days during the week where they are getting up for their morning classes. They're going to sleep early, maybe to get up for their morning classes. They're eating earlier in the day. And they have this work week, and then on the weekends they stay up late.
Mm-hmm.
They go out and socialize. They sleep in late. They skip breakfast, go out for their first meal at noon or brunch or something like that. And all of those physiological inputs are the exact same as if you actually left your time zone and flew to a different state, because the light you're exposed to is later. The food you're exposed to is later. Everything you do, your physical activity is later. So what they've termed that is called social jet lag, because you're basically shifting your behavior, your social clock,
Mm-hmm.
Every weekend. And some people do this by several hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be associated with poor metabolic health, weight gain, and also poor athletic performance.
So I find it fascinating because we do this in sports all of the time, right? So I was literally talking to my students about this week. We're talking about like a college football team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So more and more college sports are turning to morning practices.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very typical thing. Like we talk about NCAA football in particular, they're practicing in the morning, but their games are always at night.
Mm-hmm.
Or late afternoon. They're never in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about when a team does this, and so they practice Monday morning through, let's say, Friday morning, and then they play a night game on Saturday. And if they travel associated with that, and then they come back and the coach is upset with them. So now we're having a Sunday afternoon practice. We're going to add a practice. Now it's Sunday afternoon. So now you really don't know what is going on. And then we're going to give you Monday off. So then they sleep in on Monday, right? And this cycle just gets so messed up, and they're underperforming. They're not underperforming because they don't want to perform. I think there is a piece of this teamwork jet lag, right? It's not even social. They're not making a social thing. It's like, this is when the team is doing its thing. I just find it completely amazing that more people haven't got on board with this and try to figure this stuff out and have practices tied into game time, and not messing, especially with these adolescent schedules, so much. I mean, is there some research on this, or am I just?
Yeah. I mean, so there's a, and I guess if we talked earlier about kind of the lifespan of chronotypes. There's also a lifespan of social jet lag and a relationship between chronotype and social jet lag. But the people that get afflicted by social jet lag the worst are the people that are younger. They're forced to go to school early. They're forced to go to morning practices. And then maybe it's a younger person that's an evening chronotype.
Right.
So then their natural rhythm on the weekend is just way later, but all week they've got to do all the morning stuff. I mean, I've passed the school buses on the way to work, and when I was a kid, I didn't want to get up that early, but I did. And then every weekend I slept hours and hours later. Another population that I've done some work with Dr. Radzak was the military group on campus, the ROTC. And these folks, they have to get out and do their morning PT at 6 a.m. before school and everything. And they're not all morning people.
No.
And it doesn't work out great for all of them. And then their behavior outside of those days is not always, they don't always practice good sleep hygiene, just like the athletes are talking about. And, maybe if their coach wasn't mad at them and they won the game, maybe it's even worse because they stay out late and celebrate.
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? So and I don't know if people know this, in college football, you fly home right after the game. So let's say you're playing a game, I don't know, hypothetically say it's in the central time zone, and you finish at like 10 o'clock at night. You shower, have dinner on the bus, go to the airport, fly back. You maybe get back to Vegas, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning, and then we won, so we're going out, right? And maybe they get to bed 3, 4 in the morning, and I mean, it can, one night can mess you up, right? Like one day, one night is enough to trigger this. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the nature of social jet lag that makes it a little bit more insidious is that it's usually a behavior that people do every single week.
Oh, I see.
When you I guess you guys have both raced in Hawaii, right?
Yeah.
I haven't.
No, you have not. Oh,
John has multiple times, but okay.
so if you're going to race somewhere and it's a couple time zones away, I mean, how far in advance do you try to travel to get there?
I try as early as I can possibly figure out how to get there.
Yeah.
As early as you're professionally able to do, right? So people know that one day or one shift in time zones can be really damaging, but people don't think about it if it's every weekend they stay up 2 hours later on the weekends, or 3 hours later on the weekends. But my family's still in North Carolina. I go back as often as I can, and 3 hours time zone sucks.
Yeah.
Some of the kids in the ROTC that we followed their social jet lag, they did it every day or every weekend, excuse me.
Yeah.
3 hours a week, and that's their normal behavior. That's the same thing as flying across the country every week.
So they're taking a cross-country flight every weekend.
Yeah, basically. And
Well,
your behavior follows that. Your food follows that. Your light follows that.
yeah, I wonder how that's pretty rampant probably in the triathlon community too, because you're working your job during the week and then you have the weekend and you're like, okay, well now I got to get up and get my workouts in. And I don't know. I wonder how much that influences the age group athlete like us.
So an interesting thing that my doc student is finding now, he's looking at some of the sleep data from varsity athletes at UNLV, and he's finding reverse social jet lag. So in the actual calculation, when you're calculating social jet lag, people generally use an absolute power. So no matter which way you go, it's 2 hours. But I usually think of it in the sense of staying up 2 hours later on the weekends. But in some athletes, and this is more true of myself, is that my weekend social jet lag is actually I get up earlier, because especially in the summer here, I'll get up at 5 in the morning, try to get in an early ride before it gets too hot. And that's something that I might not do on a weekday. So on a weekday, I'm on my one routine, and then on the weekends, I get up super early. So I think it's an interesting idea to think of which one may be better or worse for you. But I think that there's within the athletic population, you're probably doing better things with your social jet lag. You might be getting up early to exercise versus
Mm.
staying up late to, you know,
So,
create.
there a lot of times we hear these pro triathletes who are able to take naps in the day. Good
Mhm.
for them, good for them, right? Is that something that resets a social jet lag, or is that even something to even be looking at?
It's certainly something that could help with any sort of sleep loss or sleep restriction.
Mhm.
But the other point I try to drill home on social jet lag is just that you can get 8 hours a night, and still have social jet lag.
Mm,
And it's just that you're getting those 8 hours at a different time every
got it.
weekend or on your shifted nights.
Yeah.
Um, so it's yeah, but yeah, napping is certainly a good tool. It can help with uh, trying to shift a little bit of your sleep or social jet lag or actual jet lag to try to get you back on a new time zone. But I
Mm,
think a lot of the actual jet lag literature just says kind of tough it up for the first couple days and
mhm,
try to rapidly entrain.
mhm,
And for the traveling sports teams, like you were talking about, Ted, is actually some efforts for pre-entrainment.
Yep.
So, before you actually go somewhere, what can I start doing in my time zone to shift my body and my physiology to be ready for that time zone? So I
mhm,
can start changing my diet. I can start eating at different times now before I get there.
mhm,
And there's been some pro teams that have talked about shifting their practice times
mhm.
in their current time zone to match the time zone of their destination when they're playing an away game.
Well, you and I talked about this when I think I was going to Miami to race in the national championship, and
Mm,
I used an app. I can't remember what the app was called, and it was a time shifting app, and I did it for the week before, where I slowly started to switch my
Mhm,
meals when I woke up, when I went to bed, and it was like I can't remember because it's like 3 years, 4 years ago. I think it was like a 20-minute shift I started with, and then
mhm.
a little bit more, and I only shifted. I think I only shifted like an hour and a half, even though it's a 3 hour time difference. And I mean, I don't know if it worked or not, but it was worth the effort for me because
Yeah.
I felt like I was, as a triathlete or as an athlete, you always want to feel like you're trying to control what you can control.
mhm,
Right.
And so I definitely tried to control that. And then I think one other time we were working on it, and I think I was going to Europe to race, and I think we had a conversation about this, and I tried to do just even a couple hour shift,
mhm,
and I think it's still like helpful to do a couple hours.
mhm,
Mhm.
It's something like an individual sport athlete can do, maybe a little bit easier than, you know, like a team, especially a collegiate team that they're dealing with like school schedules and other.
Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
Or would you advocate, like as a professional, would you advocate that an age group triathlete does that if they had to travel for races?
I mean, I think what you said earlier is probably the best advice is if you are racing in a different time zone, do whatever you can within your capability to get there far enough in advance. And the general convention is that you shift about 1 hour per day that you spend in a new time zone.
Mhm.
So if you're flying out from the East Coast to race here, try to get out here a couple days in advance.
Yeah.
But the other thing to think about is that we actually adapt differently depending on which direction you're traveling.
Mhm.
Right.
So humans are naturally just a little bit over 24 hours. So when you're traveling east to west and you have a long day, a quote unquote long day, you actually can train a little quicker to an extension or to a later um, shift. But if you were flying west to east, it's a little bit harder on your system because we're naturally a little bit
Mhm.
longer than 24 hours in our rhythm.
So unless we're going to Hawaii and we're traveling 3 hours, we're going to the East Coast.
Yeah.
I can tell you, like, just, once again, anecdotally, and I know you travel there all the time, but every time I go there, it seems like the race starts at 6:30 in the morning, and that's 3:30 in the morning
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
I'm not ready to race at 3:30 in the morning here.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just not. And so, yeah, if I can get there 3 days in advance, I definitely feel better. I've done it where I've got there a day in advance, and it's horrible.
Mhm,
So the interesting things that we also found from our ROTC cadets was the people's performance based on their chronotype when they had to do their exercise trials. So they have basically an exercise final exam with the ROTC, called the APFT. And if you look at their scores based on their chronotypes, all of the evening type chronotypes did terrible.
Hmm.
Morning types did great. They had to do it at 6 in the morning. So, triathlons aren't happening in the afternoon. So you have to figure out a way to train your body to be receptive to that kind of stimulus at that time, to get a little bit better at it.
So
I love it.
I'd be really interested to see if we took like, all the age group winners at Kona or a big Ironman and chronotype them, how many would actually be, the morning larks versus the night owls? Because I'm guessing very few would be night owls that could actually, because it would almost be self-selecting to do triathlon because you're successful, because you're doing it kind of in your chronotype time. Do you think that would be is anything been done with that? Is that a thing, or am I just?
Well, I can admit to doing a little bit of homework for this podcast. I know you told me it wasn't an interview, but I had to do a little bit of brushing up on a few things. And someone actually went and chronotyped a bunch of different elite athletes, and they found that triathletes actually had earlier chronotypes on average than some team sports athletes. Now, getting back to what you said, Ted, team sports competitions probably aren't going to be early morning.
Yeah.
Those are all of our individual sports, our marathons, our triathlons, a trail race or whatever. Team sports compete later in the day. So these elite athletes in triathlon were actually early morning or earlier chronotypes on average than people that were elite team sports athletes.
Hmm.
I thought that was
You had no hope if you're a night owl. Sorry, people.
That's right. Well, there are some races that start like 10 o'clock. I know when we went to Austria, that was a late morning
I
start.
think I started at 1 o'clock.
Oh, did you really? Oh, wow. Yeah.
Latest starts, and
Huh.
it kind of sucked because it was so damn hot.
Yeah, right. So this is so important, but how do I track my circadian? How do I know I'm on the right rhythm with my exercise and even thinking about, race time? Like what can I monitor, if anything?
Well, I think, one thing that we've kind of touched on a few times is just training at a time that you're going to compete.
Mm,
And, that's not always possible, certainly at the extent of some levels of triathlon and the length of that kind of competition. You can't necessarily do all of your long runs or all of your longer exercise bouts at that time. But making sure that when you're kind of focusing in on a certain time zone or a race, that you start to give your body those cues to be ready to compete at that time.
hmm
But also just kind of the good sleep hygiene. If you are doing something that is getting you really amped up late at night and it's disrupting your sleep, then start thinking about, is there a different time I could do that?
Yeah.
Is there something that I could do kind of ritualistically after that to get myself back into a mood or a zone where I'm comfortable sleeping, to try to, I guess, maintain a little bit of sleep hygiene,
Mm,
which isn't possible for everybody.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
life interferes.
So I definitely cut out my foosball, 2 weeks before a key race for that reason. But what about other things like sleep aids in terms of taking some type of medicine that gets you to sleep? Does that influence the rhythm at all?
It can. So, when you're exogenously replacing something that you produce endogenously, like melatonin,
Hmm.
then you can have some response to that your body doesn't produce as much endogenous melatonin or something like that.
Hmm.
But I haven't done a whole lot of work in the sleep supplement field. That's not something that I've really spent a lot of time looking at.
Yeah.
But certainly, if you're at the clinical levels of poor sleep, and you can take, there's other questionnaires for that, like the Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index,
Hmm.
where if you're at the clinical level of poor sleep, then certainly taking a supplement and focusing on sleep hygiene is going to be really important for improving recovery, improving athletic performance, and just making sure you don't have kind of accumulated stress that can lead towards injury.
Hmm.
Interesting. So the last question I had for you, and this is, I think you maybe already alluded to it. Do all of the cells in our bodies basically have a circadian rhythm?
Yes.
Oh.
This is one of those things where, you probably always remember the first couple lines of your dissertation or the project or the talk you gave or something like that. But this is one of those concepts that I'll always just be really excited to talk about and tell people that almost every organism on Earth has a circadian rhythm, down to, bacteria, plants. The original observation of circadian rhythms was basically putting a plant into a cupboard and showing that it still had its pattern of opening its leaves and closing its leaves over a 24-hour cycle without the input of light. And you can grow cells in culture, cells that, a muscle cell, a different type of tissue, you can grow them in culture without a body attached to it, without eyes to see the sun or anything like that. And they'll have a 24-hour rhythm in different functions and gene expression. So this, pretty much all the cells in your body have an idea of what time it is. And if you use those stimuli, like we're talking about, like the light that you're exposing your eyes to, like the food you're putting in your body and the activity that you're doing, you can shift those clocks and you can more or less kind of tell them what time it is. And that's where the idea of pre-entraining and saying, I'm going to shift my meal times to get my body onto a different time zone before I get there. That works really well because your peripheral organs and your muscles are actually more responsive to stimuli like food than just light. So adding those stimuli up, synchronizing all the different cell autonomous clocks, and that's something you could actually do to make a difference.
Well, I know we all have pets and we all have dogs. And boy, I tell you, they definitely are an organism that has a rhythm that's hard to disrupt.
My dogs could tell you exactly, 6:30 a.m. p.m. every day. They know exactly what time it is.
All
I
right,
think my dogs get messed up when the time changes worse than I do. Or
it's terrible.
he's like, "What are you talking about? It's 4 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock. Come on, let's go. It's time."
All right, I don't want to get too political here, but my last question is, are you pro or con daylight savings?
Oh man. I promised myself a couple of times in my life that I would never live on the east side of a time zone.
Yeah.
And then I moved here, and sure enough, here we are. I hate it. I'm not a fan. And there's clinical evidence that there's more heart attacks when you spring forward and they're worse.
Wow, yeah.
And more car accidents.
Yeah.
And probably more bike accidents.
Yeah.
Graham, this was awesome.
Yeah.
We've been going for about an hour. I think we could go for another hour, but this was so good, and I think a lot of practical information for the triathletes. I'm gonna do my own little test. I'm gonna do the Munich test and see where I'm at.
Yeah.
But I pretty much guarantee I'm an intermediate. John, you're a morning.
I'm probably pretty morning. Yeah.
Yep. And so we'll report back next week
Yep.
to the podcast of what our chronotypes are. But Graham,
Awesome.
thank you so much for coming on. We really do appreciate it. I hope we didn't make it too uncomfortable for you.
No, not at all. Glad I could be
You're
here.
welcome back anytime you want to come back
Yeah.
and talk about this stuff, for sure. So thank you.
Thank you, Graham.